And we have some upcoming programs that you were watching on the slideshow. Uh, Next Wednesday, Bending the Bird Curve for Grassland Birds, the Bobolink Project, and more. That should be an interesting program. Bobolink Project works with farmers to pay them to not hay until after the grassland birds have finished nesting. On Saturday, February 8th, we have our Eagle Watch at Chippewa Dam. Tuesday, February 11th, a program that will be of interest to a lot of people, integrated tick and tick-borne pathogen management research. And then in on the following week, on February 19th, Wild Stories from the History of Bird Migration Research. That's the program that we rescheduled from December when the speaker had bronchitis. You can sign up for all of those on the website. So now, the Connecticut General Assembly began its 2025 session last week, and I'm really pleased to have Rob LaFrance, Audubon Connecticut's Director of Policy, here to discuss the legislation before this year's House and Senate. There are a number of bills that are important to birds and the places they need. Rob, good evening and welcome.
Thank you, Dennis, and thanks everybody for joining us. And I really appreciate the time, and I appreciate working with the chapters here to talk about the General Assembly and what's happening in its upcoming session. As Dennis indicated, we just are getting started. The General Assembly literally met starting on January 8th, which is not that long ago, and they are just beginning their process. In fact, the Environment Committee hasn't even had its organizational meeting yet. So we'll learn a lot more about what's going to happen in the session and what bills will come up. But in order to put it all in some context, what I'd like to do is talk a little bit about the sort of the format that Audubon, at least the National Audubon Society, is using as we start to figure out what we're going to do to try and help birds from a policy perspective, both at the state level and at the federal level. So, come on, let's go here. Trying to get this to advance, and for some reason it doesn't really want to do that. Let's try this. There we go. So flight plan, I think most of the folks have hopefully heard about this already. This is the National Audubon Society's strategic plan. It's what we're using for both conservation and for policy across the country. We're using it at the federal level and we're using it at the state level. The idea is to have one consistent and thoughtful approach that we can use across the country and at various state houses with different political dynamics across the country. So if you don't have, you have the opportunity to take a look at it. I've created a link here. I'm going to share this PowerPoint with Dennis. Feel free to check it out and learn a little bit more about it. But the main proponents of it are milestones that we're trying to create. Those milestones include habitat conservation, climate action, two types of climate action, both natural and renewables, policy, which is basically starting to deal with some of the other issues that we have to deal with, like pesticides and other issues that we deal with at the local level. And then finally, community building, making certain that we're reaching out to the folks who enjoy birds and also are being impacted by some of the things that are happening across the country. So what does our healthy bird, healthy planet priority areas include? Primarily habitat conservation, core bird protections, things like the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. We want to make certain that we protect those as we get into changes in administration. We want to make certain that we have money available to finance bird conservation. Things like I heard Dennis talking about, like trying to make certain that we're protecting grassland habitats by helping to pay for people not to harvest those grasslands during the times of nesting. Protecting lands, we work with various land trusts throughout the state and the state of Connecticut itself to purchase and protect lands through easements and outright purchases through our in lieu fee program, helping to protect water. When we talk a little bit later today about neonicotinoids, we'll talk a little bit about what's being impacted by that. The idea of urban conservation, trying to create green spaces within urban areas to create places, safe places for people to avoid heat island effects, but also to make certain that we're managing forests within the cities in a way that we don't end up with the results like have happened in California. And then finally, on climate action, we're going to talk about solar deployment, all different types of renewable resources, and how that's going to play into the state's policies into the future. Connecticut, I think many folks have heard, is really one of the highest energy cost states in the country. And that balance, trying to find that balance of creating renewable, low carbon or no carbon energy sources is at odds with the cost of electricity. And those debates will happen throughout the session this year. So in Connecticut, let's talk a little bit about what's happening at under our gold dome as we get going in this 2025 long General Assembly session. Well, first of all, let's talk about who's there, who's new, who's old, who's going to be around for a while, and who's not going to be around for a while. As everyone knows, the last election did not include a race for governor, nor the attorney general, the controller, or the treasurers. They're all up for re-election in 2026. So the campaign, if you will, is on for 2026. All of these folks are going to be looking to retain their jobs, and I guarantee you'll see a lot of them between now and the election in 2026. But what happened during the election that we just passed in 2024? On the Senate side, Martin Looney retained his seat as the president pro tem of the Senate, and Bob Duff retained his seat as the majority leader in the Senate. Those folks we've worked with in the past, they tend to be pretty progressive when it comes to some of our issues. And we've worked with them in the past, and hopefully we're working with them again in the future. Senator Harding, who became the Republican leader last year, is going to return in that role. He is also the ranking member on the Environment Committee. We also have a good relationship with him. He represents the area where our Sharon facility is located, and he's been to our Sharon facility, and we've talked to him on a number of issues. And again, my sense is that he's somebody we can work with at the General Assembly to deal with our issues, excuse me. Senator Kelly, the former Republican leader, decided not to be sworn in this session and is actually up for election or up for appointment to a judgeship to the Superior Court. Hopefully we'll hear more about that during the upcoming session. Now we'll move to the House side. Majority leaders and speakers have stayed the same. Matt Ritter is still going to be the speaker, and Majority Leader Rojas will be there. Similarly, on the Republican side, Representative Candelora is going to be the Republican leader. And in the House, we have somebody new, somebody who I think might be really beneficial to Mononkatuk in particular. Representative John Michael Parker, who's from Madison, Connecticut, is now the co-chair of the Environment Committee. Senator Lopes from the Meriden area is retaining his spot in as the Senate co-chair, and Representative Gresco, who was the former chair of the committee, has actually gotten the promotion. He's now a deputy speaker, but he'll retain his position on, not his position, but he'll retain a membership on the committee. The other thing I think that's important for Mononkatuk is Senator Cohen, who used to be the Senate co-chair, is now also a member of the committee. So these are folks who are familiar with the Mononkatuk area in terms of its chapter location, and folks, I think all of you folks who are members of Mononkatuk will have a big voice with these folks because you are their constituents. The Senate ranking member is still, like I said before, Representative Harding. Whoops, and Representative. Hold on a second. Bear with me a second. Sorry about that. Representative Callahan is still the ranking member on the House side. There are a lot of new members of the Environment Committee. I've put a link in there. You might want to take a look at those. And then I've also included the leadership of the Energy and Technology Committee, as well as the leadership of the Planning and Development Committee. Again, these are all committees that are going to have impacts on some of the bills that we're trying to move through the General Assembly, either by raising them initially or in the alternative by being referral where bills are referred. So what are our priorities? What are National Audubon's priorities in Connecticut? we always and continue to have priority of making certain that we protect our coasts and our coastlines, making certain that we take care of our birds, making certain that we take care of the ecosystems that are right along the shoreline. We're doing significant work in the at what do you call it, Hammonasset State Park. We're going to be doing a lot of work. Corey Folsom O'Keefe is working on a major renovation of those sites, a major rehabilitation. We're working with the agency to do some living shoreline activities and other significant impacts to that particular area. Biodiversity and nature-based solutions. Last year, there was two major bills put forward, House Bill 5004 and Senate Bill 11, both dealing with these concepts of nature-based solutions, which I'm going to talk about a little bit further a little bit in greater detail in the rest of this speech. The other thing we're going to be working on is working lands. And working lands basically are things like climate smart agriculture, which includes climate smart forestry, but also in a very significant way, trying to restrict the future use of neonicotinoid pesticides in Connecticut. We have strong evidence from work done by the American Bird Conservancy and by Cornell University that neonicotinoids are really bad for birds, and we need to do what we can to stop their utilization or to stop their use in Connecticut. We're going to follow the New York model, which my counterpart in New York, Aaron McGrath, helped pass and got signed into law in 2023, called the Birds and Bees Act. We hope to do something similar to that here in Connecticut. So the first of our priorities here is natural climate solutions. What are they? What are we talking about when we talk about nature climate solutions? We're basically talking about the natural ability of ecosystems to keep and store carbon, but also to create habitats for biodiversity. So the point here is that we want to make certain that the state of Connecticut does all it can to encourage natural climate solutions. And we have a report, but natural climate solutions were included in two bills from last year, House Bill 5004 and Senate Bill 11. And those bills are both coming back because they only got through one. House Bill 5004 only made it through the House and never got called in the Senate. And Senate Bill 11 wasn't even called in the Senate. Both of these bills have significant policy benefits to the state of Connecticut and the people of Connecticut. We just need to implement them this year. And we can talk more about them if people have questions. But let's just go back and talk a little bit about what we mean by natural climate solutions. What this report's done, this basically report talks about the benefits that we can have by using nature to help sequester and store carbon. And if you can take a look at the left-hand side, you see some of the major categories and how much we're able to reduce if we do these things properly. On the forest side, reforestation, natural forest management, avoided forest conversion, urban reforestation, fire management, again, a big issue that we need to talk about in terms of other benefits that it has. Look at California. And improved plantations. Ag and grassland, again, for Connecticut, this may not be as big an area as it might be in the Midwest, but avoided grassland conversions. You can take a look at the numbers in terms of the total climate potential reduction in terms of carbon CO2 in each year. And then we could take a look at the different elements of that. These are basically, many of these things are farmland management techniques, how we do agriculture, what's the best way we can do agriculture. And then finally, part of the reason we're been so engaged in trying to deal with our coast issues is because wetlands, both tidal and inland, have significant benefits in terms of their ability to store and sequester carbon. And we need to continue pushing on that pedal because the benefits are also the benefits that we see in terms of protection from flooding and from major storm surges, which we want to make certain that we continue to push forward. All of these things are categorized into something we call natural climate solutions. So Audubon basically did a report on that, and I've provided the links in here, and then we can talk in some detail later about what this is about. But in essence, these climate reports, these climate benefits are what we just looked at in the previous slide. But what's the other benefit of it? The other benefit is that we have a biodiversity benefit. We have two crises these days. One is the climate crisis, which everyone's familiar with, but the other is biodiversity. As we continue to develop our lands and expand human impact, we start to reduce the level of biodiversity. And what we're trying to follow, what we're trying to mimic here is what's happening in Massachusetts. In Massachusetts, the governor there created an executive order where she's taking a whole of government approach to biodiversity, to protect habitats, to restore habitats, and so on down the line. And so, in many ways, what we're trying to do is coordinate climate solutions and biodiversity into a single bill that we could pass through the Senate through the House and Senate this year. We got a good portion of the way in that in 5004 last year, but we need to make certain that gets over the goal line this year. So this is some of the things we're talking about in terms of our climate, our natural climate solutions here. We want to make certain we measure the benefits that carbon sequestration and carbon storage can do. We'd like to see a negative emissions provision in any policies and any legal provisions that we put forward this particular year. But we also want to make certain that we're encouraging other elements of this, things like restoring coastal wetlands and paying for those, coming up with funding for those, avoiding coastal conversions, talking about maybe upland review areas for tidal wetlands, which don't exist right now, making certain that we have educated folks who are dealing with inland wetlands, making certain that we do what we can to do living shorelines work. On the inland wetland side, make certain that we have seasonal and natural flows, things like trying to create areas around riverine systems, buffers, if you will, that are protected, that you're not allowed to develop. That's also something that had came up as a bill last year, and we expect to have this year. And then finally, in the urban areas, what can we do? How can we improve our urban green spaces? How can we improve our natural infrastructure, native planting, composting? These are all benefits that we can find and utilize if we have a plan of action for nature-based solutions, which is really what we're talking about in these bills. Getting the agency to coordinate with agencies across the state, organizations like the Department of Agriculture, the Department of Health, the Insurance Department, to start to come up with policies that put forward nature as a meaningful way to both sequester and store carbon in a way that can actually get us about a third of the reductions we need in order to address the climate change, and while at the same time improving our ability to protect biodiversity. So that was a lot on that. Let's talk about other things that happened from last year. So I don't know how many folks are familiar with the Siting Council. The Siting Council is the responsible entity in the state of Connecticut who decides when and where major arrays of solar are going to be permitted. They also decide where and how things like solid waste facilities are sited. There's been some trouble there in terms of both establishing the correct level of restrictions on permits to be able to build these things, but also on enforcement of those responsibilities. So last year, under Public Act 24-144, the General Assembly directed the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection to conduct a study and report back to the General Assembly on recommendations to improve the Siting Council. That has been done. That report is available. I don't have the link for it here, but I can provide it for anybody who's interested to actually start to take a look at how they're going to try and restructure the Siting Council. It's a fairly complicated set of things that have to happen, and we'll see bills on that probably in energy and technology this session. The other thing I want to talk a little bit about is solar energy and solar arrays. So there's a lot of pressure on the agency, DEP, as well as others, to start to improve the amount of solar energy that we get. And that's going to put a lot of pressure on open space and existing lands. There's currently a law in effect that protects areas that are defined as certain types of forest. The core forests are protected under this law. Another set of things is certain agricultural, high value agricultural soils are also protected underneath this. What we anticipate is some pushback from the electric industry on trying to make it easier for folks to develop on various areas of the state, and we need to keep an eye on that. I think Connecticut has also had some of the studies that they've done, and one of the things that was included in 5004 was to take a look and make certain that we do the best we can to make certain solar arrays are developed on properties that have already been impacted by human behavior, like putting them on rooftops and making certain that we can put them on places like um, parking areas and try and do as much as we can in that space before we start to think about putting them on nature spaces. Offshore wind. So there was a major there was a major offshore wind procurement RFP put forward. The agency combined with Rhode Island and Massachusetts and put out a fairly large request for proposals. Rhode Island and Massachusetts moved forward on their proposals. Connecticut elected not to move forward at this time on any of their proposals. This will be a major issue in contention in the General Assembly this session. And National Audubon recently created a significant paper on how we believe uh, offshore wind should be deployed. So more on that. We could probably spend a whole day on that in terms of understanding all of the issues that are surrounding it. Needless to say that nothing's happening in Connecticut, at least in the short run, but there may be some bills introduced this session to try and deal with some of the issues surrounding that. But it also is going to involve other supply. Where else can we get supply? Can we get it from nuclear? Can we get more from solar? Can we get some from natural gas? All of these issues are going to be brought up in the Energy and Technology and probably the Environment Committee this year. Neonicotinoids and second generation anticoagulant rodenticides. Woo, these are big ones. So neonicotinoids, I think everyone knows, these are pesticides that are put on seeds, that are put on turf, that are put on golf courses. And we've learned from research that they impact negatively pollinators. So birds and bees and all other types of pollinators are significantly impacted in a negative way as a result of the use of these pesticides. New York and Vermont both passed laws that we're trying to emulate here in Connecticut, and we're starting to make some pretty good progress, we think, in terms of talking to legislators about this. Both Republicans and Democrats are interested in trying to do something in this area. The two areas that we're looking to look at, the other one, I think I mentioned grasses, but we're also trying to take a look at making certain that these things that they get taken care of and removed from certain types of seeds, particularly corn and wheat, because those are also currently treated with these neonicotinoids and are a really big problem for birds because the birds eat the seed, and because it's so toxic, it can kill a bunch of birds. American Bird Conservancy did a really good report on this, as has Cornell University. We can talk a little bit greater detail about that when we get through this section. The other thing we have is second generation anticoagulant rodenticides. That bill got called in the House last year, but then got withdrawn. This is one of the more complicated bills because it's a conflict between how you deal with the poison second generation anticoagulants we know impact birds in a negative way, but we also know that they're very, very effective at killing rodents. So what's the balance? How do you both try and reduce the exposure to birds at the same time allow people to control rodents? And I think everyone learned last session a lot more about this than they thought they wanted to learn about it, but they did learn a ton. And it's going to be very interesting to see what kind of bill gets put forward this session. Audubon, at least at the national level, is trying to focus our attention this session on actually accomplishing the neonicotinoid reductions and getting those out of the marketplace as best we can. The second generation anticoagulant rodenticides we're continuing to try and work on, but my sense is it's going to be a much more difficult bill to pass because of some of the real complications as to how you deal with it in terms of user conflict, for lack of a better term. So how is it all going to work out, right? Let's just talk a little bit about process. I said I'd do that at the very beginning. I want to make certain that I have the opportunity to talk a little bit about process because I think it's important. This is the bulletin. If you get an opportunity, you can see this every time you go to the Capitol. It tells you what's happening. It tells you who the members of the General Assembly are. It tells you what days they're meeting. It tells you when there's a public hearing. I encourage everyone to get on the website, cga.ct.gov, and just take a look at the bulletin. Look at it on a sort of maybe every few days to find out what's happening at the General Assembly. If you read the bulletin, you'll have a very good sense of what bills are coming up and who's basically impacting on the process that we are in right now, which is the process of trying to get concepts raised, having public hearings and meetings to discuss which bills are going to rise to the top of the table and actually be put forward to be voted on in the House chamber or the Senate chamber. Of the 100% of the bills that are called up every year, probably less than 2% of them actually make it into law. So it's a big sieve, it's a big process, and it's all driven by this. These are the rules of the General Assembly. They talk about what committees exist, what those committees can do, when they can do it, and then what has to happen between now and the end of sort of the mid to end of April, when all the committee's work will be done and all the bills that they've raised and talked about or heard in any way, shape, or form have to be reported so that they can be taken up by other committees or actually come to the floor of the General Assembly to be voted on. And as you can take a look, the JF deadline or the deadlines here that really matter the most in terms of it, and if you take a look, I think I might be over the top of that right now. When you take a look at it, the committees have deadline dates, with the Appropriations Committee being the biggest one. The Appropriations Committee deadline is April 25th of 2025. So what does that mean? It means the state budget has to be in place by that date, and then that appropriations budget will then move forward to the General Assembly for final action and negotiation with the governor. So we have not yet heard the governor's budget proposal for this year. The governor will propose his budget on February 5th, and that process will then begin the entire state budget process of all the different committees putting forward all the different appropriation requirements and requests for the whole state government. And that process will go through a series of public hearings with a recommendation from that committee to the General Assembly to vote on by April 25th. So that's the time frame that we really have to work in. If you take a look, for example, at the Environment Committee, the Environment Committee has to have its work done by March 31st. So in essence, all of the bills that we think that we'd like to see happen or actually get passed have to be voted on and voted out of committee by the 31st of March, or they're considered dead, if you will, for the rest of the session. Now, that doesn't mean they're really dead. It means that that particular bill is dead. And oftentimes you'll see that a bill that's quote unquote dead gets restored in another bill as an amendment. And that's a whole secondary process we can talk about if I'll take questions at the end here. Just a kind of quick example of some of the different types of things. I went to the website today just to pull up the different types of bills. So these are the bills that we're seeing entered into. I mean, we have any in the long session, which we're in right now, any legislator can introduce a concept on anything they want. So here are a few. The first one is actually a leadership bill. It's 5004 from last year to protect the state's protect the state's environment while planning for the development of renewable energy resources related in a manner that reduces costs connected with such protections. This is the same bill that was raised and voted out of the House last year. Now, whether it looks exactly the same this year or not will depend upon how it gets negotiated in the Environment Committee. As you can see, this was referred to the Environment Committee. We've also had issues with bear. I mean, these are just examples of what legislators are talking about. So here's basically a new act to authorize a limited black bear hunting season. Whether that goes anywhere, whether Sunday hunting happens again, it's hard to say. These are the kinds of issues that the committee is going to bring up and talk about. Another one, an act concerning regulation of low industrial frequency noise pollution, a noise pollution bill. I saw a balloon bill, like a prohibition on helium balloons. Right now, we're looking at all the different concepts that legislators are going to raise. The next step is for the General Assembly's Environment Committee to actually decide which bills they want to have public hearings on. And that process has not yet begun and will begin in earnest probably in the next couple of weeks. So let's talk about the budget. What is it that we're looking to try and address? Well, we've been talking about this for some time, but we really believe that the environmental conservation branch of the agency has been underfunded for a long time. This is the wildlife division, the forestry division, the fisheries, both marine and inland. These areas have not gotten the resources that we believe they need because we've been through an austere budget because of the fiscal guardrails that we've talked about before. Now, I'm not saying the fiscal guardrails are bad or good in terms of how they've done in terms of protecting the state budget. As a result of the fiscal guardrails, we probably have a rainy day fund bigger than we've ever had before. But the priorities underneath the government spending have not really resulted in the type of resources necessary to keep our wildlife divisions and all of the other environmental conservation branch um, programs at a level that allows them to do the work they need to do. We think this is particularly true in ENCON law enforcement. We see it when we deal with our piping plover issues along the beaches. We don't have the resources from the state government to actually do the enforcement that's necessary. And we are working with the Audubon Alliance to improve that. We did a Shorebird Protection Act a couple of years ago, and we're going to continue to push for additional resources in that space. But at the end of the day, the Office of Policy and Management is the organization that decides how many bodies, if you will, get put in the various agencies. So we need to get more approved positions for the department's environmental conservation branch. And the way we do that is we talk to members of the Appropriations Committee, we talk to the members of the Finance, Revenue, and Bonding Committee to try and get more resources for the agency and its work. So the governor will give his budget address on February 5th. I encourage everybody to listen to it. He'll talk about his priorities. But at the end of the day, we'll probably be coming back and asking for folks to weigh in through action alerts, which Dennis is going to put a little link into the chat about. We use action alerts to talk to our constituents, to talk to our members about things we ask them to write to their legislators about. Having a personal relationship with your legislator is key. If you know your legislator and you can pick up the phone and talk to them and say, hey, listen, this is important to me and I'm one of your constituents. If you get 5 or 7 people who are doing that, that legislature, and I've talked to legislators about this, if 5 to 7 of their constituents pick up the phone and call them or send them a personalized message or send them a text, they're pretty likely to listen to what you're saying and take the action that you're asking them to take. Finally, I just want to talk in terms of some of the things we're dealing with. So a lot of what we've been working on over the last number of years has been based upon the Governor's Council on Climate Change. And this Climate Smart Agriculture and Forest Working Group that came out a few years ago was able to be successful in trying to get some federal funds moved this way. And we're going to continue to do that. And in the area of bonding, we're going to see if we can't get some additional monies available for some of the work that we're talking about here. Again, this is something that at this point in time hasn't been fully developed, but it's an area we think, based upon the Governor's Council, that we need to work harder on. Another area which I don't have a slide on is insurance. I was listening to the Insurance Committee today, and they're talking about trying to come up with a bill to do a better job as to how we insure against flood and fire risk. I think we at Audubon, through our nature-based solutions, can help them better understand some of the risks that we deal with. And I think we can talk with them about trying to get some actions taken by the insurance commissioner to start to deal with some of these issues to help reduce the risk that we face through nature or climate solutions. And with that, I'm going to pause and take questions. I can close this or I can leave it up, whatever folks like to do, but that's my presentation.
Thanks, Rob. And I did drop the link to the action alerts in the chat and a bunch of other links. They'll also be in the email that I send out to everybody tomorrow with a link to the recording of this. But before we say goodnight, what questions do we have? You can unmute yourself and ask away. Janice, you have a question?
Yes, thank you very much, Robert. I mean, it's kind of overwhelming, I have to say, listening to it. And I'd love your thoughts about how does one take the first step, on somebody on a community level. I live in Guilford, without just thinking it's just daunting. How what's your advice about how to begin and where to put energy?
So I would say that the first thing to do is to find out who your state senator is and who your state representative is. Many people don't make that personal connection. And I have to say that's probably the single most important thing you can do, because once you make that personal connection, then those legislators are going to know that you're in their district, that you're a voter, and that you have concerns, that you're a birder, that you care about birds, or that you care about the environment generally speaking. My sense is you live in Guilford, so it's Christine Cohen is your senator, and I'm pretty certain, depending upon where you live, you might even have the new chair, John Michael Parker, as your representative. If you don't know how to do it, you can just go on the website and find your legislator. You can type in your address, and it'll tell you who you are. Or in the alternative, and I'll forward this to Dennis. Or in the alternative, you can just go on the website and click on the town, and it'll tell you who the legislators are in your town. So make that personal connection, write them a note, make a phone call, say, hey, listen, I'm in your district and I'm interested in what your position is on this, that, or the other thing. If you see that if that legislator, you go to their website, they're going to be doing an event somewhere, go meet them. I mean, for example, maybe we could do this when Talk. I'd love to have some of our folks take a walk with us in the Guilford Salt Marsh Sanctuary. It's a beautiful location. It allows people to understand the importance of the coastal resource. And one of the things we want to do is get folks out there to appreciate it and to appreciate nature in a way that's really helpful. Now, once you've done that, once you've made those personal connections, then it's really a question of what do you think is important to you? Like, are you interested in, for example, I have many people who are like, they're really interested in rodenticides, right? It's a really big thing for them. They've seen, like, for example, Bob Duff, the state senator from Norwalk. He had a personal experience. He had a Cooper's hawk almost die in his hands. And he basically brought it to a wildlife rehabilitator. Fortunately, that particular one was impacted by a first generation anticoagulant rodenticide and was able to be rehabilitated. But many of the others are not. So when you have a legislator like that who's had that personal impact, they're going to be more likely to be an advocate for us. And he's been quite good on this particular issue. Now, again, it gets complicated on that one because, less than anything else, there are hundreds of lobbyists at the General Assembly whose job it is to stop advocates like us from getting the things we want because they represent interests that are opposed to what we want to do. It's all done up front. People talk about it. Everybody has a different perspective, but getting rid of those second generation anticoagulant rodenticides is not something that the pesticide industry wants to see happen. So that's the conflict, and we deal with that conflict on a regular basis. We try and do it in a civil and orderly way and come up with what we want, which is why when we talk about things like action alerts, those action alerts are meaningful, but they're so much more meaningful when they come from someone who that legislator knows. I'm sorry, that was a long-winded way.
No, it was great. A very quick mini follow-up.
Please.
Do you ever go directly to the lobbyists for chemical companies and try to change a conversation there, or do you just work with the elected officials?
So again, I think depending upon how you are and who you're related to, your impacts. I'll just give a good example of it. We were dealing with a few years back. We were trying to get something passed called the municipal option. What the municipal option did was this idea of trying to put a fee, if you will, on transfers of homes. Well, the folks who are really opposed to it were the folks who are in the real estate brokers, right? The real estate industry didn't like the idea because that meant that there would be another cost of the transfer, and they thought it would impact their ability to make a commission. Well, that wasn't true with all of them, right? Many of them said, listen, the benefits that you get from this particular additional fee actually helped create a better environment for the town. And there was a small subset of folks who were in the real estate community who actually advocated for that. So to your point, you can make a difference even with the lobby groups or the organizations that pay for those lobby groups by having connections with them and making arguments with them that it isn't the best way to go. For example, second generation anticoagulant rodenticides. Why not use first generation? Why not use something else? Why not use other alternatives to try and talk to the industry itself about changing its own behavior? That's probably a good approach as well. A little
Great,
harder,
thank you.
a little harder.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you. That was a great question.
Bev, do you want to come off mute and ask your question?
Hi, I would like to know if you collaborate with other organizations on these issues, because I know that for this particular legislative session, the Save the Sound is also going to be working on neonics. And are you collaborating with other groups?
So the collaboration is the key to being successful in any of these situations. So 5004 was a major collaboration of a number of organizations. Save the Sound, Conservation Law Foundation, what do you call it? Nature Conservancy, Connecticut Audubon. I mean, we try to work as broadly as we can with all of the other organizations, the League of Conservation Voters, the Land Conservation, whatever Amy Patterson's group, I always forget what it is, the Land Trusts. I mean, we all have similar interests, and we try to work with them on a regular basis. Now, we all may have slightly different perspectives on what's the most important. Obviously, from our perspective, we think the issues that affect birds and people are the biggest issues. Others may have a different perspective, right? Save the Sound may be saying, well, we really all we care about is overall protection of the sound. That's not been my experience with them. But in general, each of our different organizations have a little bit slightly different bend of what we're doing and why we're doing it. But I find that the organizations that we work with, the environmental advocacy community, tries to work pretty collaboratively with each other. It's just a question sometimes of what we think we can get accomplished in a particular session. Some are perhaps more aggressive than others, and we try to work with each other to come up with a good outcome. So the answer is yes, we do work with others, and I think it's critical to being successful.
All right, how about Bev?
Hi, this is fascinating. Yeah, we have, like I said, a new state rep who's very receptive to hearing about issues. I mean, I'm in Orange, and he's representing Orange and Milford and part of West Haven, and he's very receptive to hearing that. So we have been in contact with him.
Great.
One of the questions one of our members had was how, when we talk about reducing the greenhouse gas emissions, is like somebody or group monitoring if this legislation is being successful?
So that kind of so in many ways, the success or lack of success is monitored, I would say, almost every day based upon where you are in the process. So the process is a committee introduces a concept. That concept has a public hearing. That public hearing results in a recommendation for a certain particular piece of legislation, which is going to change the law in a particular way. That bill basically gets kind of worked on and finalized in terms of language. There's a plain language summary that goes along with it and an analysis of its fiscal impact on the state budget. That bill then becomes something called a file copy, and all of that information is put in there. At that point in time, when that committee work is done, we move to the full House and full Senate for action on the individual bills. So, for example, last year we had 5004, which was a major climate bill, had a lot of different provisions in it, had a lot of folks from the environmental advocacy community working on various sections of it. It was trying to be business friendly, but at the same time present some real meaningful changes that would help the environment. It got through the House after about a 4-hour debate, but didn't pass the Senate. So when you ask, well, was that successful or wasn't that successful? It was successful in that we were able to get a majority member of members of the House of Representatives in Connecticut to agree upon a policy, a significant policy impact, a policy framework that passed. Because of lack of time, because of other complications in terms of the politics of the House and Senate, that bill could have been called on the last night of the Senate, but it didn't. And therefore, we're back again this year to try all over again. So the real success is when you pass a piece of legislation and it actually gets into law. That's how I guess you monitor success. But if you pass a law that's meaningless, is it really successful? And that's sort of that's the question, right? You want to pass a law that's meaningful, that moves the ball forward, but at the same time is actually can actually be executed and passed.
Okay, thank you. And when we I've spoken once or twice to MJ Shannon. We were canvassing for him in our group, and he's very personable, very knowledgeable, and when we speak to him to support that 5004 and some of the other environmental issues that will be coming up, is it better to be like just to ask him generally to support that, or is it better to be like, I'm sure he's knowledgeable about it, but should we ask him about specifics about the bill, or just please support 5004 or some of the others?
So I honestly think you both can get an education on that. He's a new representative and you're a constituent who wants to understand more about it. I would treat it as a collaborative way to deal with, and I want to make certain I make the opportunity to introduce myself to a Representative Shannon. I mean, if this is somebody who my folks are telling me here on this phone call seems receptive to environmental issues, and I'm
Yes.
the policy person from Audubon, Bev, I'd love to have an opportunity to have you help me be introduced to him and see if we if we can't work that together and have him talk about it. I noticed this here, Steve Winter, someone Mary was putting in the chat. I had the opportunity to introduce myself to him just after the Energy and Technology Committee meeting, which he's a member on. And he seemed very interested in climate issues and seemed very, very open to dialogue. And when I said I was with Audubon, and he was like, "Oh, that's great. I love to hear Audubon. We love Audubon. We love their work. I care about birds." So that was just a very that was a very pleasant experience for me to have somebody like that interested in what we do and what we're trying to accomplish. So he's someone who's on my radar screen to get to know better, maybe spend some time with. Maybe Dennis, we should invite him to your plant place there and talk to him a little bit about what you're doing in that particular space.
Yeah, that's his district area.
Yeah, we're doing that, Dennis. We're doing that. It's putting that on the agenda.
All
Thank
right.
you very much.
Thanks, Bev. Vic, I see you come off mute. Do you have a question? All the way from California?
Oh, wow.
Yes,
We have a big reach.
I'm pleased to see that you recognize my chapter name, I guess, as
Yeah.
a Southern California chapter. And yes, I'm fine. My family is fine. My house did not burn down.
Excellent.
I'm with a chapter called Sea and Sage, which is in Orange County, California, which is well, we got our fires last year, not this year. We're one of the larger California chapters. And I should make sure that everybody understands that we're a very urbanized area. Orange County, California is 80% urbanized. We have our chapter has about a 3-year-old subcommittee called Legislation and Advocacy. We do advocacy in the sense of directly contacting our local elected officials in our California State Senate and State Assembly, and we track legislation. And I heard about this meeting and I said, oh, well, I should probably find out how Mononoketuk is doing these things. And so I was pleased to get the very high level presentation that Mr. LaFrance gave about the entire state process and your goals. It's actually very similar to a presentation that chapters in California get from our folks in Sacramento, our state capital, from Audubon, California. And so I'd be interested in hearing more about what your own chapter does and how your chapters may work together throughout the state of Connecticut, as we in California are trying to do in order to move the ball forward on the environment. And since we're running out of time, maybe my best bet is to simply ask for someone who can contact me offline to talk about what your chapter and collectively the Connecticut chapters are doing to work at the chapter level to work with Mr. LaFrance.
So I'm just going to respond quickly to that, and then Dennis can talk about what happened. So there are a finite number of bills that happen, and you can follow them just by following the agenda of the energy of the either Energy and Technology Committee or the Environment Committee. So of all of the concepts we may see in the next 2 weeks, only probably about 60 or 70 of them are actually going to be ideas that go to public hearing. So if you follow the public hearing agendas for the Environment Committee, you will know which bills are out there. And some you may or may not be interested in, right? You may not be interested, maybe you are, but you may not be interested in tire recycling, or you may not be interested in brownfield remediation. I mean, those may not be something that you care about. You may, but you may not. And so what we try to do in working with Dennis and others is we try to give them lists through a policy committee of bills we think are significant, and then the ones that we think we can actually make a difference on. And that's a collaborative process. Dennis will come up to me or other folks in Mononkatuk and say, Rob, did you hear about this, that, or the other thing? And I'll say, well, I heard about it. And, I don't think the prospects are good, or I think they're really good. And through that collaboration, we talk with each other about what we think is important and what's not important. I'll just go to one of the big bills we did a couple of years ago. We did a Shorebird Protection Act bill, and Mononkatuk was really helpful in pushing for that and making certain that they were talking to individuals about it. We did another bill a few years ago as well on forage fish. But those were bills that we were introducing and working forward with. And Dennis and the team and everybody in Mononkatuk and all of our chapters took our lead, took what we were asking them to do in terms of responding and sending in letters to their legislators, action alerts, and followed up on those. So I would say the way we work that through is to try and be collaborative and focus on the things we think we can make a difference on as a bird organization. And I don't know, Dennis, if you want to speak to how you view that.
No, that's exactly right. You can only do so much. And there are some bills that are brilliant and should pass, but for one reason or another, they're not going to go anywhere. And if you spend a lot of time on those bills, you're not going to be spending time on things that you might be able to achieve. So you gotta weigh it like that. And Vic, I'll drop you an email and we can connect about more details.
Would love to get to the nitty-gritty.
Well, my executive director is going to be happy that I drew somebody all the way from California. I might get a little kudos for that. So thanks for dropping in, Vic. That's a big help to me.
Could I step in for a minute?
Absolutely.
My chapter, Matabesic Audubon, has intervened on the local level numerous times when there have been various places that we felt were going to be developed and shouldn't, and have intervened by attending meetings and put together a white paper for consideration at the local level. We've been pretty successful at that. So locally, chapters work on different issues as well.
Alison, that's a really good point. And that's a big benefit of having a chapter. For example, if there's a land use change in how somebody wants to put forward either on an application for a specific piece of property or a change to the regulations concerning development in a particular town. I mean, if you're paying attention to that or are weighing in on that, all politics are local. So in many ways,
well, that's very true. And one of the things that we intervened with was on Dead Man's Swamp and Cromwell. That went all the way to the Supreme Court of the state of Connecticut.
Well, thank you for that effort.
By the way.
Yeah, that's hard work. And I just want to personally thank you for that, because that's the kind of thing that makes a real big difference.
And it went on for several years. So you have to be prepared for the long haul.
Got to be patient.
Yes.
Thanks, Allison. Anybody else? Vic?
I just like to throw in that when I became an Audubon Society member back in 1976, it was when I lived in Middletown, Connecticut, and became a member of Matabesic Audubon. Well, I'm glad to hear that they're
Woo-hoo, that's great.
still.
That's full circle, man. I love it. That's awesome.
That is awesome.
Wow. Send me your email.
Dennis, I think, must have my email and will be contacting me, and I think he can probably get it to you.
That
Yep,
would be great.
I'll connect the two of you.
Thanks.
Anybody else? Rob,
I'll
thank you.
just say this. Dennis has my email. If I can be of assistance to any individual, feel free to shoot me an email about a particular issue or concern that you have. Happy to follow up with anybody. I appreciate all your time. I appreciate all your time and just even being here tonight to think about these issues, but also would be more than willing to help you connect with your legislators at the General Assembly and to talk about any of the issues that are on your mind.
Thanks, Rob. And thanks for this presentation this evening. I'll process the recording tomorrow and send a link out with links to all of the different websites that we've talked about this evening. Chris, you appeared. Do you have a comment?
I just saw that other people turned on their videos, but since I have the floor for 10 seconds, I'm a member of Sacramento Audubon, not Orange County, but close enough.
Yeah, but you
Cross
don't live
country, I
there.
love it.
You don't live there. Come on.
I grew up there. I'm a member there.
Great.
We
And
can
Rob,
the chapter we want.
Rob, I'm president of the New Haven Bird Club, which is certainly nowhere near as active as Monunketuck, but Jim Leahy has it on his list to introduce you and me and some of our board members. So we'll be in touch.
Absolutely. Jim's a great asset. He's been around the Capitol for a long time. He's a dynamic guy, good friend. So I look forward to that. I would
Wonderful.
enjoy that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Rob, for doing this, and hope we can generate a lot of support for the important bills in front of the legislature this year. And thank you all.
Neonics, I think we can get it over the goal line this year. So let's, if we
All
can
right,
really
well,
work on that, that'd be great. And then I think on the larger scale, nature-based solutions, it's complicated. I'm hoping people can think more about it and learn more about it. I think it's a real way to help deal with our climate and biodiversity problems at the same time. So thank you.
Thanks a lot. And everybody, have a good evening. Stay well. Vic, stay away from the fires, and take care, everybody.